Welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast. I'm your host today, Mukunda, joined also by Aditya Cole. And our guest today, we had on, I think, in so 2 or 3, so it's going back really, really far, is Dr. Jeffery Long. So, Dr. Long, namaskar, namaste. Thank you for joining us back after now, I think it must be 2018 or 2019. So it's been 4 or 5 years. So, I know you've done so much work since then. You've been really active in both teaching and writing, and kind of your activism within the Hindu American world. So thank you for your time to join us and engage with us again.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm grateful to be here. I enjoyed our previous conversation, and yeah, a lot has happened since then. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So Aditya, you're new to us. You want to give a quick background on yourself and why you're kind of also joining us in Mirror?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be in front of you all and participate in this conversation. I have been, so my background is effectively, I was an American-born Hindu who grew up like most other American Hindus, and have my father's journey in terms of studying these things has influenced me deeply. Seeing him go from effectively an atheist with a physics background to deeply studying Advaita Vedanta and then Sankhya and then Kashmir Shaivism influenced me growing up. So I heard a lot of conversations around physics and consciousness and how those two fields are related. And then as my early 30s, I became substantially more interested in these things for myself. And I'm at a point now where I have a deep interest and a kind of peripheral daily activity around trying to study and understand Shastras, and also to delve into a little bit of personal sadhana. And I'm oriented towards an interest in these subjects. So when I was able to link up with Mukunda and Rachit and Mirror Media in general, I was just deeply aligned with what I thought they were trying to do. And if there's any way I can help advocate and promote that space, I would love to do it. And for me, being able to take part in these types of conversations selfishly is going to be fascinating and interesting for me. So I'm just along for the ride and going to try to get the most out of it and contribute where I can.
Awesome. So, I mean, I'm sure, Dr. Long, like this is like a regular story you probably hear from a lot of Hindu Americans, right? Like this kind of journey towards Hinduism, in like a post, I guess, secular world. It's not really post-secular, but you know what I'm saying?
Right. No, precisely. That a lot of Hindu Americans, and in fact, I've spoken with a lot of people just through my own personal involvement in the community and in the tradition. But I also did a lot of interviews with people when I was working on my book on Hinduism in America, which I believe came out since our last conversation. And this is the story that I've been really wanting to tell in my own work, which is that you have people who grow up in America, in the American cultural environment, but in a Hindu family, typically with parents or maybe grandparents from India or some other part of the world where Hinduism is predominantly practiced. And you find people maybe initially being a little skeptical or even sort of pulling away from their family's traditions, because like most teenagers, they want to fit in with their friends. They don't want to, be seen as, strange or different in any way in school. And then as life goes on, as it inevitably does, things happen. People encounter crises of various kinds. And these will often lead people to look back at really the wisdom of what they were growing up with and to want to delve into it more deeply. And a story I often hear, now Aditya and I were chatting before the program, and it seems like his father is very scholarly and in both the scientific realm and in the realm of Hindu traditions, and especially Kashmir Shaiva tradition. But you get a lot of folks that I found whose parents basically immigrated to the U.S. in order to live a good life materially, and maybe not that much into the tradition, except for feeling that it's important and somehow needs to be carried on. And so they'll maybe contribute to the building of temples and institutions for that. But what happens very often is I've seen with a lot of people, the younger generation, they will they kind of have to go beyond their parents, right? They
Right.
want to go directly to spiritual teachers or to books, to academic writings on Hinduism. And there is a kind of awakening that happens. And what I'm finding is that what it means to be Hindu in America is different from what people have grown up with in India. Not meaning that the fundamental tradition, that the core values or teachings are different, but that what it means to experience it from day to day as part of, well, according to, in terms of people who identify themselves as Hindu, roughly 0.7% of the population, as opposed to India, where it's over 79% of the population are Hindu. So in India, you're inundated with the tradition. You're surrounded by it. You get into a cab, and the cab driver has a little murti on his dashboard, and there might be some bhajan playing on the stereo, and I mean, wherever you go, it's there. In America, it's not like that. And so depending on where in America you are, you're either getting Christianity in kind of a similar way that Hinduism permeates India, Christianity you find permeates much of the US, or if you're in mostly more of an urban area, you're in a much more secular space, right? So in either of those cases, you have the experience of being a minority, right? Having a worldview and a way of thinking and a way of experiencing life that is not quite in tune with what everyone else around you is doing. And now in my case, this is voluntary, right? I didn't grow up in a Hindu family or in a Hindu tradition. My wife grew up Hindu, so we have created a Hindu environment in our home, but it involves you in a lot of interesting conversations, because at some point some question will come up and you'll address it from the perspective of the tradition, and someone will say, "Oh, that's very interesting," or "Are you Buddhist?" or something like that, that is indicating that this is not something that they hear all the time, right? There are elements of Hindu thought that have really permeated quite deeply into American culture, and that's also part of the story of Hinduism in America, I think. And this comes from the various gurus, the swamis, people who've come from India, starting with Swami Vivekananda back in 1893, and then of course the increasing, the immigrant population, and now the population growing up Hindu in America. But it's still, I would say, not mainstream, and so the scope for misunderstanding is also very great. And I think there are a lot of frustrations that can arise from that situation of always being misunderstood, or feeling like every party you go to, you have to give the Hinduism 101 in order to then get to the really interesting stuff that you want to talk about with people. So these are kinds of experiences that people narrated to me, and that I've had myself as well.
Sure. I mean, I think a couple of these points are really interesting to me, because it seems like, I'm sure, like Aditya and yourself, we spent time in India and the US, and there is something different about Hinduism in the US. It doesn't have the same, the shell, let's say that. It has the same yolk, but the shell is a little different. It's it's a little more different color, a little more, I think, smoothened out in some sense. Because I feel like American Hinduism is kind of like made more palatable for across the board than I would say Indian Hinduism, which is much more, in my sense, it's much more about that diversity. It's okay with the thorniness that exists in like the nature of in the Indian world. But yes, I would say in the American sense, it feels like we have to grapple more with a lot of the issues that arise, right? Even though it might not be our understanding of Hinduism, like, for example, we can talk about caste, or you can talk about the regional differentiations between traditions. It's almost like at some level, people go to any temple here, as opposed to particular types of temple. Like the temple, like say Malibu Temple here, would have both Shiva, Vishnu, and Devi all in one location to make it palatable. And you'd also have like other temples that would have a particular South Indian type looking deity versus North Indian, which is the whiter marble that you use, and so on. So I think it's interesting to me, like at least at that level, there's some difference. And then even so, I would even say like it also pops up to me like it feels a lot like in America, Hinduism is about belief. Versus in India, it's like no one cares if you believe it. Did you go to temple? Yes. Fine. No, that's it. Like, if like I've talked to people, they're like, yeah, my parents don't care if I believe or not. Like if I say I'm an atheist, they're like, shut up, just go to the temple and come back. Like no one cares about what they believe. But here it's like this, we just have to stake that thing in the ground. I'm an atheist, I'm not Hindu. It's so different. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, both of you guys on that.
Oh yeah, this really has to do a lot with the dominant culture here, because my very good friend Prabhajika Rajaprana once wrote that if you think in terms of like default settings, like in a computer, right, the default religious setting in America, no matter what your actual religious belief or identity or practice is Protestant Christianity, which is all about belief. It's all about faith. It's all about adhering to a creed. And within the history of Christianity, wars have been fought over some difference of wording in the creed, right? So believing this or believing that really sets you apart from other Christians, and then certainly people who aren't part of Christianity. And then of course, if you add in the belief of many Christians, of probably most, that what you believe is somehow intricately tied with your salvation, right? What's going to happen to you in the next life, then it becomes very important to people. It becomes really a badge of who you are. Okay, well, what do you believe? You believe this, you believe that. And what I've found growing up in the Catholic tradition was that it was a bit more like what you find with Hinduism in India. Belief was very important, but also just the very fact that you ate certain foods, right? You hung out with certain people. There was an ethnic component to it, right? I come from an Irish background, and Irish Catholicism's different from Italian Catholicism, right? The same creed, same church, but the way things are observed, the attitudes people hold. And but even growing up, even though it's part of, a big part of Christianity, even growing up Catholic in America kind of sets you apart from that default Protestant mindset. And so we all grow up with that mindset to some extent. And I think that's affected Hinduism in America dramatically, because it becomes then a matter of belief, because it gets sort of assimilated to the concept of religion, which again, I've had a lot of conversations with people, and even, written about how it's hard to find a precise parallel between the concept of religion and anything in the Sanskrit lexicon, right? People will often translate dharma or dharma as religion, but that doesn't quite work, right? Because dharma is a more expansive concept. Sometimes people say it's not a religion, it's a way of life, because they're associating religion more with belief. There's the idea of sampradaya, which is kind of like the idea of a religion or a denomination, in terms of you do have a specific set of texts and practices and a lineage that's carried on. That's kind of like religion. But I heard one of the swamis once from Hinduism Today give a talk about this, and they were talking about the fact that there are many Hindus who don't like the term religion, precisely because it kind of confines and redefines the tradition in a way that's foreign to it. And he was very pragmatic. He says, look, in America, you have freedom of religion. You don't have freedom of dharma. You don't have freedom of sampradaya. You have freedom of religion. So you have to work in that framework in order to participate in the public square and be recognized. And
right.
Have a place,
And I think this comes out in the recent Vivek Ramaswamy question. I think that was trending all over Twitter when
Yes.
someone asked him about Christianity, and like, you know, his response is, like we share the same Judeo-Christian values, and it's like this tailoring of, but this is also what makes Hinduism very difficult to put into a box. Is
Yes.
he is kind of right. Like
Right.
there are some values we share across the board, some ideas we do share, and I mean, like depending on what tradition and how you define the word God, then it's like, are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking about different things? Because if you're saying Brahman is God, and I think Vivek belongs to the Advaita tradition, so like you can use a term God very amorphously for Brahman, right? And then you can say, yeah, we worship one God, but then it doesn't really get into the nuance of like monism versus. So this is where it's like interesting that because of Hinduism's malleability across the board in many, many ways, it allows itself to plug and play in different cultures and traditions in different parts of the world. Like even when I talk to like Caribbean Hindus, they talk about how different their sense of Hinduism is, but they still have remnants of bhajans and Rama and Krishna and Shiva, and they do these practices. But I think it's really interesting how like over, like then you consider Southeast Asia, you go to Bali and you see Hinduism there, you're like, oh wow, this is so different, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sorry, it was a little tangent. Advi, do you have a point?
Maybe an observation on the same topic. So I'm a little bit less familiar with Hinduism in India. I mean, I've been to India several times. I think there's a much greater diversity of Hinduism at the family level and geographic level in India, like given all of the different sampradayas and the population, right? Like there's 800 million or whatever it is number of Hindus there. And there are really distinct flavors of Hinduism. I think in the US, it's such a small number of Hindus who are mostly, especially the second or third generation Hindus, disconnected from any sort of like practice of Hinduism or even the philosophy that, but there is still this like drive to stay connected to the culture. So it becomes much more like a monolith, and it all seems to fall under the Advaita Vedanta type Hinduism that, this is what Hinduism is, Advaita Vedanta, and that's kind of what is propagated, and at least those concepts are trying to be taught. So I think that's just one interesting difference, that it seems to be a little bit more of a monolith here in America amongst mostly non-practitioners, especially American-born second and third generation, as opposed to in India, much more diversity of practices and that are either regionally specific or family specific, and I would say like there just seems to be more diversity in what Hinduism is in India compared to what it is here.
I think that's true, and because in America, the questions Hindus will be asked about being Hindu are different from, well, in India, people won't even ask questions because it's just so all pervasive. But no one's going to ask you what's it mean to be Hindu in India, unless they're. But in America, people, well, okay, if you're coming from that default Protestant Christian reference, where do you go to church? Well, we go to a temple, right? So you have to have an institution that is kind of church-like. And temples in America are much more church-like, I find, than temples in India. Temples in India, I find people come and go. You come for darshan and you have that experience and then you leave. Temples in America have Sunday school. There's a set time when, now people can largely come and go. And my mostly Protestant Christian students are always amazed by the informality that they see when I take them to the temple from their perspective. But nevertheless, compared to India, it's got much more of the feel of an organized religion in the Western sense,
I think
just because it has to survive here. Yeah.
I think part of that is also just because of the lens of language that we have to put on it. Just if you grow up with English as a native language, every single concept has to be through the lens of like a Abrahamic concept.
Yes.
Everything, like kids are asking, well, about what is God, what is really, like there's the first concept is kind of like the Abrahamic concept, and then they're trying to map Indic concepts to those, and it can lead to a kind of a incomplete or divergent view, as opposed compared to in India. If you have the native concept, and maybe there's colonial remnants in India as well, and that people are suffering from, but maybe not everywhere. And so there are people there where their intrinsic thought is first the native concept, and then trying to map it outwardly to like, how does it relate to other concepts, or how can you communicate the same idea?
But I would also add, I think what's interesting, another level of complexity in the American side of American Hinduism is we also have the race issue. Like, what it means to be a white Hindu or a black Hindu or Asian Hindu or even Latino Hindu is so different than what it feels like to be like Adi or me or Indian Hindus, right? Like it's a very different experience. And maybe even like in some sense, like what I've noticed is there's two kind of paths most converts or non-Indian Hindus take. Is one, they try to be as traditional as possible, and then the other thing is the perennial view. They kind of take the perennialism perspective, and I find it interesting because I want to have on more non-Indian Hindus on the conversation, because there's perspectives here that Indian Hindus are kind of missing a lot of times. So yeah, I mean, any thoughts on that, Dr. Long?
Well, precisely, because I am one of those very people, and I've tried to borrow a phrase from Buddhism, tried to follow kind of a middle path in regard to what you're describing, right? Because, as you say, there are people who take up a Hindu tradition and they go through a complete kind of cultural makeover, right? They'll take on a Sanskrit name, change their dress, change a lot about themselves. And consider that that's necessary to really authentically be Hindu. At the same time, you see people who've grown up in the tradition in America who don't do any of that, right? So, are they not Hindu? Are they not authentically Hindu? And then of course, you have the people who seem to almost want to keep the Indianness at arm's length, which I find that also problematic, and I suspect there's probably some maybe conscious or unconscious racism going on there. Why not be willing to take up some of it? I mean, that's.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
I struggle on this because I feel like the Indianness of Hinduism, while it is somewhat important, and especially in places of yatras and like things like that, my concern has always been is if there's some level of claim of universality of these traditions or whatever it is the Indianness core? Like, for example, if you go to like Southeast Asia, Hinduism, there's a real Indian centricness outside of like the names of a city, like Ayodhya or whatever. They'll call a certain river like the Ganga of this or whatever, but you don't find like the need to be Indian in dress or culture. But I do think they're like part of the problem is there is a cultural supremacy kind of notion, and I don't want to make it too overt, because I don't think it's like on people's mind first and foremost. But I think they have difficulty trying to separate the universality of these Hindu concepts. Whether you go back to the Vedic tradition and talk about what Indra means vis-a-vis Zeus or this, or are these merely deities, or are they representing these manifestations of reality in a particular form, right? So these are the conversations I think like Hindus haven't really been having about ourselves in connection to meeting other cultures and other viewpoints and other people across the world. I mean, I don't know.
I've had actually some like really it's interesting you bring that up. I've recently been thinking quite a bit about this from the perspective of now I have like a little baby, and so I often think about several generations from now, or where if I value these traditions and these practices, and I think that there's a deep both personal and societal impact that they can have, how do I best set my future progeny up for not losing this like cultural inheritance that's super valuable for them? And I've asked this question actually, like just in the last 2 weeks, I've asked a few people, what do they think is there a substantial impact of, let's say, sacred geography, like you mentioned yatras, or say Shaktipitas or Jyotirlingas. Is there an experiential aspect of those things and being in proximity to them that's very beneficial, say, for multiple generations, and to be within, say, like the ecosystem that India can provide in order to, if you want to practice these things, there is kind of an ecosystem set up to allow you to do that. So that's one aspect of things that I've been thinking about lately. That's kind of in line with what your question is. And then the other is like you're mentioning, there is this Sanatana aspect. This is not like a geographically the teachings are not, yeah, exactly. They have nothing to do with, they're about the nature of self. They're about the nature of self and the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality, and what the relationship is between these two. That's definitively like a universal question that's applicable to anybody and practicable by anybody. So I agree with you on that front. I do think that maybe there is concern by people around like misuse or appropriation of like these types of things for specifically like, you know, negative means, for things that where they're trying to do harm. And so I think maybe that's where some of the concern could arise from, as opposed to say like any sort of like a notion of like cultural superiority or something like that. That would be my perspective on it. Like the question.
And your thoughts, Dr. Long? Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, so for me, I mean, this is a wonderful topic. This is just because this is really essential to it. This is where people live, right? And whether you're of Indian descent or non-Indian descent, but this tradition means something to you, you know, this question comes up. And I would say that in terms of the basic truths of the traditions, absolutely, as you said, it's Sanatana, right? It's eternal, it's universal, which means aspects of it can be found in multiple cultures, multiple traditions. And that's all, I think, true and valid. For me, where the proverbial rubber meets the road is in terms of practice. And what I have found is that, well, so earlier on in my journey, I was very much, I would say, on the hard universalist end of this question, right? Okay. You know, if karma is real, it's real, whether you grew up in India, whether you grew up in New Jersey, whether you grew up on Mars, right? It's a reality. So, you know, karma, samsara, like all of these things, nature of consciousness taught in the tradition, it's like science, right? It just applies no matter who you are or what culture you identify with. After a few more years now of practice, what I found is that things like mantras, for example, it makes a difference to the quality of the experience you have if you're using, say, a Sanskrit mantra versus maybe just an affirmation in English, let's say. So, for example, so meditating on Shanti, for example, I have a different experience than if I'm just thinking about the English word peace. Peace, peace, peace. I can make my mind peaceful just thinking about the word peace. But Shanti is going to take me to a deeper place. There is efficacy in a lot of the practices, the language, and so on, that is part of what we might be tempted to call the cultural trappings, right, of the deeper Sanatana message. So I think this is where it becomes difficult. If we say, yeah, there's cultural variation, and on an ultimate level, that doesn't really matter very much. What matters is the eternal truths. But there are these points of ambiguity where it's not clear. Are we talking about something that is merely cultural and therefore perhaps dispensable if what we care about is just truth and spiritual life? Or are we actually jettisoning something that might really help us on that level if we aren't attentive to it? So that's why I take kind of a middle path now on this topic. I don't think a Westerner or, you know, which I would include a person of Indian descent growing up in the West, has to, you know, I don't think we have to stop wearing T-shirts and, you know, all you know, in order to practice sadhana and, you know, progress on the path. But I think a lot of these things that were developed in India and have stood the test of time for thousands of years have done so because they're efficacious. They actually produce a change in our consciousness. So yeah, we don't want to get rid of any of that. I think we want to.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I mean, like, but you know, like Sanskrit has something to it. That's something I find to be ineffable in some sense. You know, like there's especially when you get to, like, you know, when you're talking, you know, Vedic chanting, whether you want to see the chandas or even the particular, you know, mantras or it's just very, very interesting. There's something going on here that I don't think many other languages possess. And I'm not saying it's unique across the board, but I'd say it's something similar to the Mahabharata. You know, whatever is found here is found elsewhere. What's not found here is found nowhere else, right? It's the same idea. That's what I think Sanskrit's like. Like elements are found everywhere in every other tradition, but there's something that Sanskrit has that brings them all together in some way. Like, but it's also the issue of mapping, right? Like Adi brought up earlier, the word peace has a different feeling than Shanti. Shanti has this sense of not just calmness and peace, but of like harmony. That just like this nature of balance that just kind of exists. And all these words I think are like, again, they don't touch that word Shanti in the same way. And go ahead, Adi.
I was going to say, I think so. This concept, and I'm not the one who should be really talking about it, but I'm peripherally familiar that this concept has kind of been studied deeply, intrinsically within the tradition, at least in like Kashmir Shaivism, as this concept of vak. And where there's 4 levels of speech, madhyama, pashyanti, vaikri, and like the deepest and you go with the speech, like the ultimate level, the last level is one and the same as consciousness itself. So I do think that there is, at least I believe in theory, there is a deeper connection between some of the sounds that are in the Matrika order or in the Malini order of the letters, and some conscious experience.
But this is actually funny, Aditya. This is the contention amongst the Mimamsakas and Nyayas and the Buddhists, right? They argue about the nature of language and whether it actually is giving us the direct one-to-one experience of reality, or if it's correlational, or if it's causation, if there's, so it's actually, this goes back like, 2,500 years, 3,000 years of conversation around this, which I think is fascinating, because I think it's, we're talking about it. Sorry?
I said, I told you I wasn't the right person to talk.
No, but it's interesting because you are the right person to ask, because like, I think this is where a lot of Hindus don't know this stuff, right? Like they're just, these ideas have been discussed for so long that even only in the 20th century in the Western psychology of phenomenology and linguistics have we started to like broach these questions. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Long, if you want to bring some light to this, it'd be great.
I'm trying, and I'd like to bring some of my background that I now have of Japanese Buddhism into the conversation, because this was a big issue, of course, for Buddhists in India, because as the tradition was simultaneously spreading across Asia, if Buddhists in, say, China insisted that, okay, if you're going to follow this path, first you need to learn Sanskrit, because that's the only way you'll have access to reality.
Interesting.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
There'd be about a dozen Chinese Buddhists, right? And we would never have heard of them. So it was important to Buddhism to make that distinction between, well, there's the truth, and then there's the language, which is the vehicle which conveys it. And they sound a lot like very modern in terms of their linguistic worldview, right? There's the arbitrary signs which we have assigned to certain meaning and so on. So there's hotly debated between Buddhists and Mimamsakas. However, again, when it comes to the area of practice, there were, when Buddhism gets as far away from India as Japan, there are Buddhists who begin to realize and get a sense that some of these mantras are very powerful, and that getting some of the texts, especially we're talking about the Tantric Buddhist texts, getting them through the medium of the Chinese translation was missing something. So one of the founders of one of the oldest sects of Japanese Buddhism, the Shingon sect, Kobo Daishi, his name was Kukai while he was still living. He was a monk who traveled to China searching for an Indian teacher who could teach him real Sanskrit. And he found a teacher in the city of Chang'an, which today is Xi'an. And in fact, at least according to the legends, he developed 2 of the 3 syllabaries that you have to learn if you study Japanese, the katakana and hiragana. And hiragana certainly it's modeled on the Devanagari script and on the ordering of the sounds, everything. I mean, if you know Sanskrit, learning hiragana is actually very easy, because the order and everything is already there. And he develops this script precisely so that he could render Sanskrit mantras and Sanskrit teachings more directly without the intermediary of the Chinese characters, because the importance of the sound. And if you go to which I had the privilege of doing a few years ago, if you go to the central Shingon Monastery, it's on a mountaintop, it's a place called Mount Koya, not too far from Nara, the old capital of Japan, south of Kyoto and Osaka. You go there, they actually have a ceremony, a fire ritual called Goma. Well, that's Homa, right? They basically are doing a havan, and amongst the verse, and these are Buddhists, but they're chanting Vedic mantras as part of their practice. This is all via Tantra, right? That this all comes.
But it's like the Vedic mantra in the tantric form, right?
Exactly. It's in the tantric form. So a lot of those same mantras, bija mantras and so forth, were adopted by tantric Buddhists in India. And then this was all transmitted to China and then by Kobodaishi to Japan. And there was another tantric master around the same time in Japan. It's called Dengyo Daishi. He founded what's called the Tendai school in Japan. There also they have the bija mantras and so on. And so this understanding that something gets lost in translation, right? That we can over translate was understood by I think maybe more so by the Japanese Buddhists, because they wanted to recover this original authentic thing. Whereas the Buddhists in India, who are the debating the Mimamsakas, were saying, no, that all doesn't matter. What matters is the Dharma, and so on.
But I imagine their practices, even the Buddhists in India's practices were like antithesis of what they were saying, right? Like there had to be like at some level importance. Like otherwise Buddha's words don't mean anything. Why would you pick apart his particular grammar in Pali if Pali doesn't have some sort of significance?
Exactly. And Pali became for the Theravada tradition the equivalent of Sanskrit for the Brahmanic traditions, so the Vedic traditions, and so I think this is all very relevant to the question of adapting Hindu traditions to America today. That the way Buddhism and Hindu traditions in Southeast Asia were able to transmit themselves in a way that has authenticity and yet is also adapted to the local environment. That's the burning question, I think, for American Hindus too. Like we want it to be American,
right?
But we want it to be Hindu, right? And there has to be this very fine point, I think, of balance where it's American enough that we can access it, but it's authentic enough that it's still, recognizably the same thing, and
right.
And connected to those deeper spiritual realities that we're all trying to access.
Right. So on this point, it's interesting because I think this is where like the line comes with cultural appropriation versus not, or so like when you look at like since we're talking about Japan, you look at all through, since when I was a kid and stuff, and even a little bit now, I watched Japanese anime and I've read manga, right?
Yes.
You find suffused through all of these things, Hindu things, all the time. Yeah. There's Indra, they call him chakra for, there's the words like Chakravartin, there's, Saraswati, Ganesha, their own variations of this, right? And like these stories or these deities from the Indian world found themselves in modern manga to a level where like, it's crazy to me. And I'm also like, but it's obviously it's part of Japanese culture through the Buddhists when they bring these deities with them and they do the worships and stuff, right? So, and then I sit back and think, I'm like, is that kind of what's happening in America? Are we doing that with vis-a-vis yoga? Like when people, and then the question is like, well, I don't think the Japanese initially were doing anything about like monetizing it or trying to think about it as a commercial like venture without the the belief or the adherence to it. And I feel like that might be the difference here, is this sense of let's just take these things, not just take the physical superficial look of a thing, because that has brand value, quote unquote, and use that to bring people in and then kind of forget what that thing is about.
Yes, I think that's a big difference. I think the other big difference is the power differential between India and the West. And I guess a third element we would add is racism, which
Sure.
really did not exist till relatively recently in human history. I mean, if you go back and read Marco Polo's account of Asia, and he talks about the different peoples he encountered in China, Southeast Asia, India, he does not talk about people's physical characteristics. Oh, people have dark skin here and they have light skin here. He talks about what people believe and what they eat.
Right.
And that's what, Indians are Hindus and they're a vegetarian. And like, that's, what he thinks the reader needs to know. And so I think that these concepts of race and race hierarchy, I think that colonization and its after effects, the neocolonialism, and then exactly what you said, secularization and the okay, we want to sell this. It doesn't mean that we don't want to transform your consciousness. We don't care about your consciousness as long as you pay us money. And so yeah, those three elements were not there. And that's where it becomes a disanalogy, I think, between the transmission of Buddhism and Hindu traditions in Southeast Asia, and the transmission of both to the West. At the same time, I think there are some analogies that are worth. There are enough similarities to make it still, I think, a useful exercise to try to see how we might learn from that experience of the transmission of these two Indic traditions across Asia, because in both cases, you do have the agency both of the transmitters, which, I mean, in our American case would be people like Swami Vivekananda, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, etc. And then you have the agency of the people who are on the receiving end. And in Japan, you get people like Kobodaishi who, are very sincere Buddhists, and that, they dedicate their lives to bringing this to their people. And I think we have people like, I think we have analogies like that in the West as well. I mean, if you think about, again, the journal Hinduism Today, it was started by a white American Hindu monk, but it's a very respected sort of mouthpiece, if you will, of the global Hindu community. So it requires us to engage in this sort of very delicate and careful work to avoid the cultural appropriation, to avoid the superficiality, at the same time to not go to the other extreme where we sort of put every single aspect of Indian culture on a pedestal and say we have to follow that because we're from a different climate, different period of history, different everything.
I think it's a really interesting perspective, actually. It's one that I haven't thought of before, is that like just this historical continuation of like what's happened across the world, specifically with like the propagation of Hinduism in like Japan and China. That's very interesting. Because my default mechanism of thinking about these things is one of preserving something that might be lost, and that might be specifically given my cultural background of being a Kashmiri Hindu, and so Kashmiri Hindus have been persecuted, and it was at some point later that I realized what they were trying to preserve, why it was so valuable to them. That seed of value like just became like planted in me, and so in my context of trying to understand and navigate these things is, there's something super important that I want to make sure doesn't get lost. But it's really interesting to look at it from the perspective of, oh no, this is like, there can also be just this natural flow of information and absorption within a specific time and place and culture, and it can flourish that way as well. It's just a really unique and interesting perspective to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, part of me sits here like, I struggle with this as also like probably you do, Adi, is like this idea, I think back to what Krishna says in chapter 3 of the Gita, right? This is the truth, the yoga that it's ancient, but it's lost over time, and I'm bringing it back to you, right? At some level, I think of Hinduism and the Dharmic traditions in that way is, yeah, they're going to change. They're going to change with time, place, situation, and move around. But if I believe, or I know these things are true and real, they'll be rediscovered. They'll be brought forth again, right? There can never really be gone. Like the particular tradition might go away for sure. And we have that. We've had that, like a bunch of shakas have been lost in the Vedic tradition, a bunch of different types, like, there's forms of Vaishnavism that I know that were preceded, probably like 2nd, 3rd, 4th century BC to 8th or 9th century that were like very similar to Kashmiri Shaivism, Turka, that are now gone, right? For some reason, they got subsumed or got lost. I mean, it happens across the place, but like there's still the kernels that exists for the tree to sprout again, you know?
Yeah, agreed 100%. I mean, I think that that's evident with like this, what you mentioned earlier about this like perennial perspective and perennial experiences. There's definitely, I mean, the truth of the truth, and it'll be discovered. It's just a matter of trying to make the amount of effort and suffering that goes into rediscovering it as less as possible.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I think that's what it is.
Yeah, and again, it's this sort of almost like a balancing act. Like, what gives us hope is this idea that, well, this is true, right? If all of our knowledge of physics were to somehow disappear today,
Yeah.
it could all be rediscovered because it's there, right? It's the nature of things. And same with Dharma. At the same time, yeah, we don't want to discard or not speak up when something that has been incredibly valuable is being, you know, endangered in some way. And this is why, I mean, even if I don't necessarily agree with them, I don't sort of take issue when I see Hindus in social media, for example, getting very angry and upset about something they see written about it, because it's like, yeah, if you're coming from that perspective of, you know, you've seen your tradition denigrated, you've seen, you know, people, you know, living beings harmed, right, over this, people persecuted, losing their homes, that we should be angry about that, right? That's the appropriate reaction. The thing is to not, I would say, let that be where we dwell, you know, as our endpoint, right? That's then becomes very self-destructive. But that, you know, the reason all this is valuable is because it gives us access to this vast, infinite field of truth and transformation.
So I mean, so on this kind of point, but I want to shift a little bit, because over the past few years, what I have been noticing more and more is, so most of us Hindu Americans in America are relatively educated. You know, we're elite insofar as we probably went to elite universities. We're interactions with mostly other elite people. So even our own knowledge of Hinduism, functionally in many ways, sometimes comes from elites, meaning like academic elites, right? Right. So one of my concerns has been what I've seen over past many years is this movement amongst not all academia, but a good portion of academia to start talking about Hinduism in a pretty like objectively negative light across the board.
Yes.
And not really, you know, like there's some great scholars, including yourself and many other scholars that were somewhat practitioners and scholars that can take the good and the bad and be like, look, it's a complex issue, it's nuanced. What I find a lot more of the scholars is these are like the hard lines of just Hinduism is casteism, it's you know, misogynistic, this, that. It's just everything down the line goes. And I find that, and I don't want to name scholars, but there are a lot of them out there that talk like this. And
Yes.
what happens is what I find is a lot more young Hindu Americans, like probably mine, Adi's generation, roughly our age, and even a little bit. I think the youngest generation, the ones that are in college or just recently have become much more vocal and connected to the traditions. My generation, I would say mine and Adi's, we're a few years apart, but like still, we've become very antagonistic to Hinduism and the entire world around that because we've been kind of raised by the academic world of thinking about Hinduism. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but it just strikes me as that's why there's a lot of anger amongst people, I think, from my generation. Like we have to fight back, or the ones that have changed their views over time. Yeah. So just your thoughts.
Oh, I've probably have more thoughts on this than we have time to go into. My first objection to the very negative representation of Hinduism you've described, which I've also seen, is a purely academic one, which is when I was in graduate school, and here I'm maybe I'm sounding like an old man now. Back when I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, which is an institution
right.
the Hindus,
because you studied under Wendy, right?
Well, she was one of my teachers.
Yes.
Though what she was doing was very different from what I see these folks doing.
No, I agree.
Yeah, because you know, with Wendy, Professor Doniger, by her own account, she was writing books for, other New Yorkers who liked Woody Allen films, right? She wasn't really thinking about practicing Hindus reading her work. And I once heard her say, well, she would probably have phrased some things differently if she knew that was the case. Whereas for a subset of contemporary scholars, it has become kind of a political campaign, and it's people do scholarship, and that's fine. That's their scholarship. But a lot of this is carried out in social media, actually. Right. And I see some of this, I think, gosh, when do these people have time to like write and do scholarship? But but in terms of the academic objection, one of the things that was really very strongly impressed upon us back in the 90s was the every generation is sort of critiquing the generation before it. And what we were taught to be very suspicious of and to reject in the strongest terms was something called essentialism, which is basically when you say, okay, here's religion X, it is like this, its followers believe this, under these circumstances, this is what they'll do, as if you could know everything about a person by knowing their religious label. It's like, so Hindus are like this, Hindus believe that. And we were taught, every time you see that, be suspicious. They say all of these isms are constructs. This is something we use as scholars to try to explain what are actually very complex, nuanced phenomena. And Jonathan Z. Smith, who famous religion scholar who taught at Chicago, he was there when I was there, is a very famous sort of almost bombastic expression. I don't know if I can remember it word for word, but he basically says religion is the product of the scholar's study. In other words, there's really no such thing as these religions we talk about. There are living human beings who believe things, do things, sometimes do things for reasons they really have no idea. It's like, well, this is just what we do, right? It's sort of like you were describing sometimes people in India, right? This is just what we do, right?
Yeah.
And so you take all of that and then you put it into a tweet and say, this tradition's misogynist, this tradition's, I mean, it's the old essentialism. Now, the essentialism we were being taught to critique tended to be very positive about religions.
Right.
So, okay, what is the essence of Hinduism? What's the search for the infinite, right? Or,
right.
And then you're losing a lot of interesting and important social reality and dynamics. So we were saying, no, don't go to those big oversimplifications. Talk about things in a nuanced, detailed, thickly descriptive way, right? This is the way I was trained. And this very bombastic, highly politicized tendency to kind of not only it's not just the fact that it's negative, but it's not very scholarly to call a whole tradition misogynist, or to call a whole tradition racist, or to call a whole tradition casteist, right? Because you're always going to find exceptions to those things. And it's also it's an essentialism because it's focused on the negative.
Right.
It seems designed to denigrate. And another thing, and then this is kind of move into my second objection. Let's say there are genuine reasons to object to and to take issue with things that some Hindus say or do, right? If your goal is to win them over or change their minds or explain why that's not right, you're not going to do that by saying, well, you're all misogynist and racist and casteist and so on. And it's just going to harden, it's going to harden the polarization. So, if someone is just relentlessly negative about Hinduism, I don't know why any Hindu would want to listen to them, really. Whereas if you have someone who is critical, but also appreciative, where appropriate, right? Then that's a serious person, I think. That's a serious thinker. And now it has become so heated that you do have people who are nervous about saying anything critical. They don't want to be lumped in with the other group and get all the hate mail and so on that comes with that. But if you're a serious thinker, you say, okay, a critical thought, the way I was taught, it doesn't just mean criticizing all the time. It means looking at things and say, okay, here are some elements that are good and defensible and even helpful, and here are some things that, well, are problematic. And then a certain amount of epistemic humility, I think, is maybe the third thing. I think that a scholar is someone who says, I don't know, and I want to know more, and I'm curious. And so rather than to jump immediately to a moral judgment, to say, okay, why is this the case? If this looks problematic to me, is there something in the way I'm seeing it that may be problematic? And is there something there that is genuinely problematic, and problematic from whose point of view and according to whose value system, right? And so I think that this polarization, what it's done is that a lot of Hindus who would be very interested in and engaged with the academy in a very positive way have just been kind of turned off, right? I mean, you get the the knee-jerk reaction. Oh, Western scholar, they're trying to trash Hinduism, right? So whereas I actually also think that the last thing I'll say about this at this point is that I think the folks we're talking about, I don't think make up the majority of the academy. Right. It's a very, very, very vocal group. And, for the average person, they're not going to go and read a dozen books. They'll read that tweet. They'll read that Facebook posting. They'll read
that voice is so loud. It like, for example, they overwhelm I love Robert Goldman. I think he's a fantastic scholar. I might not disagree with even Wendy the Donner guy. I don't disagree with a lot of her positions, but she's meticulous. But she's good. She's a good scholar, right? Yeah. And Sheldon Pollock. And there's quite a few of those people. Like I might not agree with their conclusions or their perspective and their lens, but I do understand the work they put in. And what I'm finding is the new generation of scholars I find. Not new generation, but whatever. They're probably my age or younger, roughly. They're not that good. Their scholarship is claims, generally not evidence. And it's claims down all the way down. And it's just, the claims are taken as if they're true in and of themselves. And my point is, I mean, the flip side is also like you end up having a lot of hardcore Hindu supporters that want to act as if there's a golden age. There's nothing wrong with Hinduism. There's no issues and I'm like, come on, this is much more complex than there. This is perfect and it got not perfect. Because if Hinduism is about human beings are dirty. They're mucky. It's going to be no different. Right.
That's what the Mahabharat's all about, right?
Yeah, that's right. Even God himself, coming down. From some perspective, people can criticize God. That's the whole point. The texts themselves criticize God and brings it out. And God's response a lot of times is tough luck. I don't know what to say. This is what living in this world is like. The perfection is not something we can achieve as a human being, right? As an embodied being, because we're bound by karmas and samskaras and all this other stuff, right? So I think when we have these conversations, the issues I tend to have is not only the first point, which is these academics are politicizing a lot of things and making it political, but they're not willing to be like, I have a bias. Someone like Wendy might be like, yeah, I have issues with particular things. I'd look at things from a certain lens. Mm-hmm. Understood. Now we can understand how your scholarship comes out. But a lot of people don't want to say they're biased their own way. And that makes it difficult because when people read, they're like, oh, this is a scholar. There's like this weight. Like scholars are the elite of the elite in some sense, not monetarily, right? Like just like we talk about, people go to a scholar to say, hey, this person's opinion means more than anybody else's opinion on the subject, right? So, hey, you Hindu who has been Hindu 40 years, your opinion's wrong because this person said it. And this person's been studying it for 20 years, but they have that PhD.
Right.
And I think this is like the eliteness of scholarship has to also play a role as to whether they're the gatekeepers of knowledge or not. And that's
and we have to be a better job being gatekeepers of each other, right? So now, of course, I'm not going to name names. In fact, I don't even know who the person is because peer review is confidential, at its best. But I'll just give you an example of an article that I read recently that was arguing for a point. And there were two extremely important and relevant pieces of data which would count against that thesis the person was trying to argue. Now, I agreed with the thesis the person was arguing for, but in my peer review, I said, look, if you want to make that case and make it as strong as you can, you have to talk about this stuff over here
Right.
that counts against that, because the first thing that someone disagrees with you is going to say is, well, what about this and what about this? And if you have not already addressed that in your article, it looks like you don't know, right? But what I find is this, yeah, it's very disturbing, is desire to only present things that support your argument. And that's not good scholarship. Good scholarship wants to get at the truth, I think. Truth sometimes seems like almost like a quaint idea. It seems like more like political speech acts with a lot of folks. But I think if your scholarship is going to stand the test of time, it needs to take everything into account and then explain why. Okay, despite these two things being the case, nevertheless, this other argument is compelling because X, Y, and Z, right? And I'm seeing people cutting corners in that regard to make political points, and that's the problem.
So I'm going to offer a perspective on this that, I think that the historical backdrop plays a large part of the visceral reaction that people have, where like the colonial history of India was backed and empowered by somewhat scholarly works and theses that were used intentionally, and the motivation behind them may have been intentionally destructive. So to take a bunch of people who were affected by that, and then now they need to be nuanced around similar things. You read it, there can be an assumption of malice that is sometimes rightfully put on scholars and sometimes incorrectly put on scholars. And I think that it's not necessarily, I don't think you can blame the victims of a historical injustice for making an assumption that's wrong. So I think that's like one perspective on it. And I would say the other note that I would have is, I don't think there's been an adequate, and maybe this is just my own, I don't think there's been an adequate internal response. So, and that's something that I would like to see happen in the next, 20, 30, 40 years, is for Indian and Indic scholars of these traditions to engage with the global community at the highest level. And I think when that happens, then there would be the nuance amongst people who viscerally react would probably increase dramatically.
So I have a couple of points to you on this. So one thing is, I think your point historically is absolutely correct. There are many scholars that, like a lot of the German scholars, for example, were in the 18th and 19th century, were in the process of nation building. And that meant to going back into trying to build, and they were looking at texts like the Mahabharata or ancient Indian texts and saying, oh, this is our tradition there's some true Aryan version of this that's like Germanic at some level. And I think, Joydeep Bakshi and Vishwa Adluri do a great job in their books on this. But what's funny to me about this is the work they're doing is the same work many scholars do even today when you go back to the Mahabharata and say, well, it must have been by a group of scholars. Like, for example, one of the arguments is like John Brockington makes this, and other people make this, like, oh, it's a text of Bhargavas. The Bhargavas took this text and made it into what it is, the monstrosity. So they're using the same methodology on a group of people they have no idea who did what. But the moment you start talking about their own scholarships or the traditions they belong to, they're suddenly like, oh, you're not a real scholar. I mean, this has been the response to Joydeep and Vishwa when they're doing the same kind of work with real people and real history that you have tangible evidence for what many scholars are implying in the past occurs, but they have no evidence for. And I find it really fascinating this is happening. At one level, it's like this historical, like, it's interesting point. One perspective, and the other perspective, I think, with your second point about what's your second point? Sorry, I lost you there.
The internal, like, Indic perspective.
Yeah.
Response.
So on this is what I've noticed is, so a lot of the scholars that are of Indian origin in the West, and I mean not all, but some, actually fall into the camp of the politicization, right? They're either super getting into the anti-Hindutva I don't want to go into politics. I don't care about it, but like they're super anti-Hindu, so therefore anything that comes out of that space in India is inherently just bad and wrong, and we have to fight it. And let's not try to understand human beings, but like let's just make broad brush claims. Like one of the things, what upsets me, and I'm just using one scholar's name, no one has to respond to this, but I will use it, is like, for example, Treshki, who's a scholar of, say, medieval Persianate Hindu world. But the way she talks whenever people talk to her is she's a scholar of all of Indian history and religion. She could talk about Mahabharata, but she could talk about 20th century fascism because she's a history scholar and a historian. You will never find a Western scholar in the Western world who's early Christian expert, like Bart Ehrman or Robin Faith Walsh, who are early Christian scholars talking about Christianity today versus Christianity the first few centuries. They will say my scholarship is really, really only for this area. Whatever happens, Protestant Reformation, all this stuff, I can't talk about. I can't talk about modern Christians because they have a different perspective. There's a different history. There's this hubris that comes with a lot of scholars in the West to India that says, because I am a scholar of Hinduism, I know everything about Hinduism. I know everything about these traditions. And I think is why a lot of Indian scholars in India have difficulty being interlocutors. Number one, English is not many times their first language. Number two, they just get thrown aside. Like, and their work is not given the relevance it should be given. Because they write in Hindi, they might write in a different local native language, and they're just not treated well. So that's just my perspective.
Yeah, no, and I think, and I have some experience with this myself, because one aspect of this too is that if you look at the courses that are taught in most colleges and universities, if you have a robust religion program anywhere, you'll have Hebrew Bible / Old Testament, New Testament, early church history, medieval church history, Protestant Reformation, Counter-Reformation, modern church history. And then you turn to other traditions, you have a whole course on Hinduism. There you are, right? It's like your scholarship may be on, say, the Mahabharata, but you have to teach this course that goes from the Vedas to, Gandhi or beyond. And you're almost kind of forced to be an expert on everything, and you really aren't. As you say, you really aren't. One thing that I found, I teach at a small college, and most of my students have really no prior background in any of that, so whatever they're learning is what they're getting from me. So I want to be very careful, I want to be very clear, I want to be very nuanced, but I also have to be very broad. And I think it can convey the illusion that I know all of Hinduism. And I think your comment is a good salutary one. We must never delude ourselves into thinking that we're experts on all of it. We have to say, I don't know, right? When we don't know. And that could be hard, right? Especially when people have taken up sort of this political platform where showing weakness, right? Saying, well, I don't really know. That appropriate scholarly response in the political arena, well, you just get shut down. Then you say,
right.
He doesn't know. Well, let's talk to the next person who knows, and the other person probably doesn't know either, but they're ready to say that they do. And so yeah, I think this it's easy to blame social media on everything, and I don't want to do that, but there is something inimical to serious academic thought and the scholarly bent of mind about the tweet, right? Mm-hmm. Or even the Facebook posting. I've gotten into discussions and even arguments with people on, let's say, Facebook, and they'll say, well, what about this? And I'll say, really, there's just not the time or the space in this medium to give an adequate answer to the question you're right. asking. And but people do, or they try to, or they pretend to, and that's where I think we run into this particular problem.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, look, the stuff isn't easy. We're trying to compact thousands of years of history that are complex, nuanced, with sources that might be credible or have, or others don't, and we don't have enough sources, and so there's a lot of gap filling going on, a lot of like assumptions, and it's just complex. And and to say that we don't know, that's okay. Like even today in this day and age, there's like, as a lawyer, someone comes to me and says, oh, can you do this? I'm like, yeah, I actually don't know that law. I can't give you that advice. but I can refer you to someone that's probably good at this. I studied this for a semester in law school, but that doesn't give me any expertise in this, right? But I feel like there is this, I mean, a lot of this is politicization again, and that's sad that, maybe it's always been the case, and maybe this is where I have like rose-colored glasses on, where I think what scholarship should be versus what it actually is. And I think, should be pursuit of truth, but in reality, like any other human project, it's a convoluted mess of interests and different values, and it's no different than anything else. And maybe that's how we should approach it.
What can you get a grant for, right? And then you do that project, right? The
right.
Things like that. Yeah. Well, so and yeah, you're right about that. And in terms of politicization, I mean, it's fine for scholars to have political views.
Sure.
I have political views, and everybody has political views. But unless your expertise is about that thing, right, then your view on it has as much value as
any other person.
Any other person. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also important in your scholarship, like when people should lay out what their positions are, so that your reader, like for example, a lot of times when you do the pure scientific, like pharma work, all the doctors or they have to write what their interest lies. Oh, it's funded by this, funded by that, or whatever. Similarly, like when we do social science or humanities, I feel like people should be like, well, this is the lens I view the world through, and this is my political commitments. Maybe, I mean, I just think that's interesting for not only for the reader but posterity to be like, okay, how do we approach your text, right? Like instead of saying it's absolutely objective.
Yeah, and that's why I'm open about my religious beliefs and my life journey and
right.
so on. So it's all related to that. And so if people should read it with that lens in mind, because that's going to help them understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Adi, you had a comment. Sorry.
Oh no, I think that's an interesting perspective, one I haven't thought of before, and I think I agree with it. It would make studying certain perspectives, it would give it the appropriate lens to look at it with, which you don't know if you don't, without that. I think it's a really interesting idea. That's all.
Yeah.
And it's a really charged environment where people think, oh, Western scholar, you're hostile. I'm like, hey, I'm part of the Vedanta Society. I took Diksha in 2005. I have a guru. And so like everyone can relax and say, okay, now this is
right.
And of course, there are people who are hostile to that perspective, but then they can read something else.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. Everyone has a choice of what books you want to read or not want to read. But so kind of on a similar topic, I think there's been a lot of I mean, this gets a little more political, but if we don't want to talk, we don't have to. But I do find it in the past couple of years, it's just been, I feel like Hindu phobia has become much more salient of a thing. And I don't know if that's just because I've just seen more of it in my feed, or is it because there's actually data here? And I know, for example, like Parth Behar and two other people in New Jersey in Rutgers did a study on Hindu phobia online with the terms like Bajit and stuff like that, and they were showing a marked increase. But I do find look, caste is always going to be a tough issue, and caste in America is also a very difficult issue. Not because I think it exists the way we think it exists in India, but it's because I think there's difficulty in understanding how it's changed coming here. My experience growing up in this country is I knew I was quote unquote Brahmin, but I didn't know the caste of any other person. Now someone would come tell me it's caste privilege, but then all my dad's friends were non-Brahmins. They were, people from, even people now we consider Dalit, the word, I didn't know that word at all. I didn't know untouchable, all that stuff. We had them over for dinner. They're part of our social network. And then suddenly now it's like, well, you're a casteist. And I'm like, I was? I'm like, I married a non quote unquote Brahmin woman. My family's married across racial and caste lines. This is interesting to me, but this is such an accusation against, maybe it exists for people that came from India that live here now or whatever. But I don't know what's your sense? Both of your guys' sense.
Do you want to say something about that first?
I don't have much of a sense of it. I mean, from a lived perspective,
Yeah.
the accusation seems like completely absurd. It just seems like a weaponization to me. Like, that's just my perspective of it. It's not something I've studied or have, but in my like lived experience, like it would be similar to yours. Like it's just an absurd accusation that I think is just a political weaponization. That's how it feels to me. I don't have much else to say on it. I haven't studied the topic or understood the arguments on either side very well, but that's how I feel.
So before the Cisco case came about, which I'm you
I'm
just want to
familiar.
talk about, I had exactly the same impression. I had been an active participant in Hindu temple communities, and as a scholar, but also as a practitioner,
Sure.
and as a member of a social, network, a community of people. And I found that consistently, caste was either something people just didn't really talk about, or when they did, well, we don't believe in that. That's not, authentic. That's not Vedanta. That's not what, Swami Vivekananda talked about. And so as I was writing my book on Hinduism in America, I was prepared to say that based on my observations and the interviews I had undertaken, and that this was a phenomenon that seemed to basically have not migrated to America with the Indian community, was something sort of left as a kind of cultural baggage back home. Then the Cisco case occurred, and I thought, well, I'd better not say that, or there are people who are going to say, hey, look, you're ignoring this issue. And so, and I certainly don't want to deny that there are people who have felt that kind of discrimination, kind of exclusion in their lives, and I think the last thing you want to do is silence or ignore that. I think that it's significant that it is, well, let me put it this way. The experience of those of us who've been active in the community, and you've both said this just now, and pretty much every other Hindu I know in America has said similar things to me. It appears, at least for a lot of people, to be a non-existent issue. Now, maybe that means we need to bring more visibility to it. But what I'm seeing is, in this kind of polarized environment, is that you have a lot of people talking about it as if that is the only issue, right? Well, Hindus are all castes, and your reaction is the same as I've seen many other Hindus have. Really?
Yeah.
Was it? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be. How did that happen? And so I think that's where I think this gets very, very hotly contentious. But a lot of the conversation around race in the U.S. I think can be instructive for this conversation, not in a simplistic way, not that casteism equals racism equals, they're different phenomena. But I do understand as a white male that it's possible for me to be not bigoted, but to, just by virtue of who I am, participate in unfair hierarchical structures, because that's the society that I'm in, right? Now, I always saw myself as relatively disadvantaged. My family was not super wealthy. The only way I went to the elite institutions I went to was through scholarships. And if you asked me at one point in my life how I got those, I would give the old-fashioned American answer. Well, I worked really hard and I'm smart. So here I am, right? Now I understand that there were things about the exams I took, for example, that might make those less accessible to another person who may be just as smart and just as deserving as me, but that they grew up in a different kind of cultural matrix and they didn't have some of the advantages that I did have. So I understand that now. So I think what happens is that gets oversimplified to, well, you're racist. And it's like, well, no, I'm racist, but I am the product of a racist structure. But if I'm self-conscious about that, then I can use whatever position I have to try to mitigate this for everybody, but it becomes difficult because when we're talking about the Hindu community now, we're talking about a community where people who look and talk like me have been the oppressors, right? I mean, it was the it's Europe that colonized India. It was the British who colonized
Sure.
India, and did a lot of this scholarship that was very damaging, and so on. So for me to now be part of the community, and then say, okay, my fellow Hindus, let's all talk about how we're all casteist and so on. That looks pretty bad, right? I mean, it's like you've been warmly welcomed into someone's home, and you come in and you start criticizing their decor, right? And maybe their decor is pretty bad, but it's not your place to say it, right? So I have not been outspoken about caste-based issues, primarily because I don't want to be mistaken as having some kind of axe to grind against the community as a whole. I love the community. The community has been so welcoming to me, and it's these are my loved ones, these are my friends, these are, you know, the people I am in community with. So I can have those conversations maybe privately, but I'm not going to go online and say, you know, Hindus have a casteism issue. It's like it's a really sensitive topic.
Yeah. So a couple points. You want to go ahead, Aditya? Or?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to say, I mean, a few things. So I think one is, just an observation, is that the default assumption, because of the backdrop of conversation, is that it's already something negative that has to be discussed. And I don't know whether it's something negative or something positive, to be honest. And like, I have seen many arguments about how the Varna and Jati structure enabled the Hindu civilization to survive waves of colonization, both Islamic and British, etc., and how the institutions survived because of this. I've also seen arguments about how there's a complete decentralization of power that occurs because of these structures in place. So even to approach the conversation from the lens of casteism is to start the conversation from a perspective of equating it with racism. And I don't know if that's the right place to start from. I really don't.
I agree. And that's why it's not a perfect analogy.
Yeah. So that's one. And then as far as you gave an example which I thought was interesting. And this isn't an original thought of mine. I read a post on this. I read somebody's thoughts on this recently, but I thought it was interesting. And he was posting about Dr. Jordan Peterson talking about equality of opportunity, and how, and he made a point which I never thought of before, which was community-based opportunity is not necessarily a matter of it has historically, it could have been a matter of taking control over someone else's resources, but it could also be an internal cohesive unit that trusts each other and then builds these opportunities for that community. So it's not intrinsic. I wouldn't intrinsically assume that opportunities that present themselves because of sacrifices of one's own community or ancestors is intrinsically bad. I think that those ideas need to be nuanced and discussed with whatever they are being talked about. So I just think that there's different perspectives that where you start the conversation from really makes a difference.
Right. I think that's fair. So a couple points. I think one I would say is, so I think it's not just, part of this is anecdotal, but it's also like, I think like the Carnegie survey came out and provided some more data sets that talked about caste in America and how that plays out. And I think it shows at some level that it's not as important, or not important at all, to most Indian Americans or Hindu Americans in America. And I think that plays out with, like, when you see so many people. I think the bigger issue is actually not even intercaste, interlinguistic marriages. Like people Gujarati marrying Punjabi, Tamil marrying whatever, that's where like for example, Adi, you're married to a Gujarati person, correct?
Correct.
And,
yes.
Yeah. And I'm sure the conversation wasn't like, hey, what caste are you? And, oh, you're not upper caste, we're not going to do it. Like, I've been married once and married again, married twice. My first wife was not Brahmin. She belonged to an entirely different community in Tamil Nadu, but we didn't see eye to eye on things. My second wife is white, but we have black children, half black children. So there's this dynamic that's going on. But I think that's more and more the case within, I'm not saying Indians from India who have come and settled here, but like people growing up here. Like it's much less of an issue.
I agree.
Yeah. So
I was gonna say I agree with you, but I would also just caveat that whole thing with, I think who someone chooses to marry can almost never be like evidence for like casteism or racism. That's marriage is a separate, you know what I mean? I mean, if somebody chooses to marry someone who they think they have more aligned with, that doesn't make them against anyone else. You're choosing to marry, you know what I mean? It's a different,
sure.
I don't know people, and I've seen that example given as like an example of being casteist or being racist. Like if someone does choose to marry within their same like varna, I don't think that's, I
I don't
wouldn't
think that's,
see that
and
as,
so I don't think it means one is casteist. It might be showed I prefer like vegetarianism, this, that, whatever, like certain, like, you know, even now, I'll tell you this, like, there's things about being Indian that I can't share with my wife or my children the same way that I could share with the Indian person, right? It's just there's ease that comes with it, right? Like I'm sure for you, you know, Adi, even like in your part of your Kashmiriness is difficult to share with your wife because they didn't grow up with that. They didn't have that same experience. And just like you might hate Garba Ras, but she loves it. But that's part of like the culture she grew up in, right? So, and same with you, Dr. Long. There's probably things about being American, white American, that are intrinsic to you. That's like Indian person's probably like, I don't get this the same way. And
Yeah. My wife and I joke that, she's a westernized Indian and I'm an Indianized Westerner, and we sort of met somewhere in the middle. But then part of the joy of that relationship is learning about those things.
right.
I've loved learning about Bengali culture and then Indian culture more widely, and she enjoys, going to Missouri and hanging out with my family and, hearing stories about me before we met and all of that. So, yeah, it is. There's the connection between the two people, and then there's this wider issue of who you are, but that's part of what enriches the relationship and
Right.
makes it so cool.
Yeah, and just like for example on like the Cisco case and these things, it's interesting. The state dropped it, and no one's claimed. I don't think anyone here would ever claim that people are not bigoted or mean to each other. Like,
Right.
and that can even be based upon individual reasons or group. Like my group is better than yours, my family's better than yours, so I have these whatever, and that happens all the time. And I'm not taking away anyone's experience that, and that's terrible that it does. Now the question always has come in the American context is like, has that played out to like jobs or housing or the things that are protected in America by law? And that I think is where like the Cisco case has shown that the evidence is not there. Like
Right.
even like the fact that the person that they sued hired a bunch of people from Dalits particularly to bring them up and do this work, and he himself gave some of his money to the person that sued him. And so I mean there's just a little more nuance here, because I think what people fail to understand at some level is when Indians came here, they didn't have anyone but each other,
Right.
and like, it's so interesting to me that somehow every other group of people across the world is seen to have not brought all their negative baggage with them, but like Indians automatically are assumed their caste is so intrinsic to the very core of our being that we would not but travel with it, and we would not but change for it. And I think that's, yeah.
I might differ with you a little bit on that topic, just because if we go back in time,
Yeah.
there were immigrant groups coming into the U.S. who were sort of assumed by people already here to. I mean, there's a long history of anti-Catholic bigotry, which
that's true.
I learned about growing up, and Irish people, Italian people, Hispanic people have all at various points been sort of tarred as, well, they're Catholic, so they live in the Middle Ages and they have lots of kids and they do this and they do that. And so I kind of think that Indian Americans are just kind of experiencing the latest.
No, but my point actually, Dr. Long, was that this happens, like, it's one thing to say the outside community thinks that. This is something the inside community themselves cite. Oh, like, this is the problem I'm finding. I'm not talking about like Americans that look in and don't understand. I get that ignorance is something that's part and parcel, but like internally, like amongst our own community, you see people say this, and then when I've pushed back, provide examples, they can't. And this is the problem. I'm like, and I'm not saying you need to speak on it. You don't need to speak on it at all. But I just also want to tell you, once you become part of the family of someone's house, you can critique that house.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that's true. But there's
because
always
it's not about Indians, right? This
Right.
just your whiteness has nothing to do with your Hinduness, and I think this is where Indians need to get over this. It's like if
Right.
someone who is a proper sadhaka practitioner within the tradition, who gives a crap about their race, their gender, their whatever it is, right? This is part of the things that within Vaishnavite traditions, especially the Bengali traditions, say if you're a Vaishnavite, you can never ask about their varna, their jati, their caste, any of that stuff. It's outlawed because you're a Vaishnava, you're a Vaishnavite.
Right.
So you're allowed to critique. I'm just not giving you permission.
Well,
I'm just saying.
and I appreciate you're saying that. And maybe this is just my own sanskara, but what I tend to do instead of critique is I like to phrase things positively.
Mhm.
So in Vedanta, we're taught see the divine reality in everyone, in all beings. There's no scope for racism, for casteism, for sexism, for any kind of prejudice against any person. We're all one. We're all part of the same infinite Brahman. And so phrasing it positively, I find, it gets across the same message, and it's not pushing at people's sensitive points where they feel they're being backed into a corner, or who's this white guy to criticize my family, and that's, I mean, you're avoiding that by emphasizing the positive.
Sure.
And there are people who, I don't know if this is the case, but is someone in that other kind of political camp that we've been talking about might say, oh, well, then you're just kind of enabling. No, right. I really believe, I believe in the we're all one, and this is why this is part of what appeals to me about this tradition. I would not be part of all of this if I didn't think it had the ability to radically transform all of us individually, but even collectively, in powerful ways. And so, what the sort of relentless negativity that we're seeing is I think it's misguided, and I think it's destructive. And as you say, there are people in the community itself that are taking it to heart and replicating it.
Right. I find like a lot of this is the fight that many Hindu organizations, whether it's HAF or now Kona or whoever else, is having to engage with. And the difficulty has been like, just being very, very honest, is you have scholars, political sides on the other side that are willing to just throw in on the other side. But on the Hindu side, the difficulty is people don't want to be suddenly, because the campaign has been HAF is Hindutva fascist, Kona is Hindutva fascist. Anything what I find now is anyone that asserts Hinduness at any level in any confidence is immediately labeled a fascist. Like, I have nothing to do with the BJP. I could care less about that government. But the moment I start talking about the moment I say I can understand the frustration these people have, and because of XYZ that has occurred, then suddenly, oh, you're a fascist. Mm-hmm. You would say this, right? Mm-hmm. Why aren't we talking about the fact that many of us across the board here are, number one, very liberal. We love our Muslim brothers or whatever it is, and we want them to thrive. We have no issues with any people, but we do understand the pain because we feel that. We experience that in everyday part of our lives. Like growing up in America, getting picked on, having my Yajnopavitam ripped off in school many times, and having to wipe off my tilak when I go to school so people wouldn't make fun of me. There's things going on, right? Like cow, oh, you don't eat cow, a bunch of other stuff, right? Like, oh, Indiana Jones comes out, you guys eat monkey brains, this, that, whatever. But there's pain hidden here. And people, to say that I understand that doesn't make you say I am part of the project that wants to disenfranchise, kill people, do any of these things. And
that's very well said. That's very well said.
But the problem is, like, scholars have difficulty, not because they're cowards necessarily. Many scholars, by the way, have talked to me on this podcast. I'll come afterwards and say, I would have spoken up, but like my career would be over. Honestly, like there is this push for there. And I think this is something to address within the community, is to say, just because you support HAF or Kona and you think that caste isn't an issue the way it's made out by the other side, doesn't make one a fascist. It doesn't make one anti-democratic. It doesn't make one any of these things.
Well,
When
this is
of course.
polarization. It's just you're either this or you're that.
Munda, you're ascribing a certain level of like benevolence to the people that are making these claims that I don't think is necessarily there.
I try to give the benefit of doubt.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hold on.
Nope, I don't know what it
I think you had
I'm
to
gonna,
pause for a moment. I really
sorry.
appreciate everything you've been saying.
Sorry. I had my wife just came back and there was other dogs her cousin brought over. So that's why they're going crazy. But no, so just on that point, I think that's where part of my frustration is like these organizations are doing good work and they're doing good work for Hindus. I just feel like even recently there was like this Hindus on campus released a video about what they want for Hinduism. And I've held spaces on Twitter and whatever for young kids that want to, like, they fear coming out and talking about their religion. They fear talking about their traditions, and because it's always under attack, and it's sad. You shouldn't feel that way, right? You shouldn't feel sad and to express what your belief systems are. And the first question anyone asks you is, "Oh, what caste are you?" Right? This is, I mean, are we just caste? End of the day, this tradition is so much more. And not to say that the tradition itself historically has dealt with this problem. Like Mahabharata, the entire text is grappling with these natures of people, and their entire Bhakti movement, the Alvars, the Nayanars, they all talk about this stuff. It's not like as if like this is, Ganesh, everyone, right? It's a very complex thing, and we've dumbed it down. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with everything you've said. I really do. And and as you put it so well, it's not that these aren't important issues, that we need to grapple with them. To work for a world where everyone feels they belong. I mean, this is what we want. I think what Aditya said is very interesting, that that maybe I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist or anything. It seems like maybe there's some deeper agenda. What I find very often with not everyone, but it is very widespread, and not just the Academy of Religion, but the Academy more broadly, is that the default worldview there is not so much Protestant Christianity, but it is a sort of a physicalist, atheist kind of worldview, where you're not really friendly to any religion, right? Religion as such is seen as a kind of false consciousness. And so there's not that felt need to be sensitive to someone's religious sensibilities, right? And so, they just come out guns a-blazing again, and they for some it's Hinduism, for some it's Christianity, right? There will be attacks made and things said that are, as you said, they're very hurtful to living human beings, and they are these generalizations and essentialist statements that aren't even really scholarly in the first place. So the idea would be, I think this is what you're doing in your podcast, we need to work on creating spaces where, like what Adi said earlier, that internal voice from within the community can really talk about these things.
Right. And along with that is just this idea that, having a space where we could discuss these things openly and not antagonistically, but like with solutions. Like if someone came to me and was like, "Hey, I've been treated this way, I've been oppressed, like, let's do something," I'm all in. Exactly. Like I have no desire to be like, "Well, I'm not going to agree with your viewpoint." We know human beings are fundamentally, my podcast, are fucked up. So like, let's just say we have that nature a part of us. And that's not because we're inherently terrible beings. We're complex beings with like a lot of subconscious things we don't know are happening. And the reaction occurs on our conscious and our actions in the world. And part of this whole point of Vedanta, Buddhism, and Jainism is understanding the subconscious pushes and pulls that drive us to behave in these terrible, horrible ways.
Yes.
And I think this is where, like, the traditions we bring to the table are trying to say, even the text that has this is, you can do better. We can be better. And not because like we're just inherently capable, but because their inner self of our deepest self is better. And we're mucked up with the raga, dveshas, and the pushes and pulls of everything. Remove that mala or that dirt, and you get to a place where you can't not but treat people with love and compassion and humanity.
Yes, and as Swami Vivekananda puts it in his very beautiful modern way, we are all inherently divine. And that means finding that within ourselves and seeing it in the other and living on the basis of that assumption that we're all inherently divine. And if we really work from that, there can be no prejudice. There can be no deliberate harm, right? Because the divinity in me would be relating to the divinity in you.
There's nothing other than the self, and everything is, yeah.
There is nothing else.
So, I mean, we've spent a good hour 45, and I want to have you back on because I think the topic I wanted to talk about, Jainism, we haven't got to yet, and I would love to do that because I don't think having 20 minutes is going to suffice to even scratch that surface.
Oh, we can have a whole conversation.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I think that'd be great. You know, part of me is what I want to do, and tell me how you would feel, is to have, you know, a few scholars, not just yourself, but a few other ones join like a roundtable discussion on like various topics, and, you know, maybe have one or two non-scholars like me and Adi be interlocutors and have like kind of a discussion about issues within Hinduism in America, India, or traditional theology or particular areas. I think it'd be really interesting to do that.
I think so too.
Because I think a lot of times, I know you were a part of the various academic groups around Hinduism and Dharmic traditions, but I feel those are so academic. It's different to have interactions with non-academics like myself and Adi.
That's right. That's right. You know, and I think it's very valuable. And you've had some wonderful scholars on your program. I mean,
I've been blessed. Yeah.
You know, I think this is a wonderful space because, you know, you can bring in people who have this kind of expertise and make it available to those who, you know, just have a hunger for knowledge and who have a perspective and experience, but maybe not the expertise or the language to express it. And I think it's a very powerful thing. And yeah, I mean, this is really, I mean, kind of going way back to, you know, before we actually started today, you were, you know, saying, you know, is there any particular issues you want to talk about? And I said, well, this is going to be at the heart of it.
Yeah.
My desire in my own work has been to contribute to that positive space, you know, to say, well, what is valuable? What is, you know, universal and universally relevant in these traditions? And you know, why should we be excited about Hinduism, about Jainism, about Buddhism, about the Sikh faith? All of these traditions, right, have so much to offer. All of humanity, right? You don't necessarily have to identify yourself as a member of that community to see, oh, there's wisdom there, and I want to bring that into my own life. And I think that wisdom ultimately is the solution to a lot of these questions and debates and discussions that we've been, you know, talking about, you know, that are going on. That if we're all attentive to that deeper wisdom, those solutions will present themselves.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah.
Adi, any last minute points, you know, before we try to close out for today?
No points, but it was a pleasure, guys. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You know, Dr. Long, you know, it's always been a pleasure to have you. You know, I want to have you back on. I think we can, you know, one of the reasons I started this space, I started this space like this was, especially in the Western world, there's a lack of this, right? And we just saw like this is an opportunity, and we're very clear from the get-go, we want it to be more academic in some sense, bringing academia to regular people, because this is when through academia is when I learned about really complex ideas, right? The academia has been a blessing across the board, like, you know, learning so much about the nuances between the tradition, nuances between a particular text, the different ideas and different viewpoints that come into understanding a tradition or a group of traditions or whatever, the history. And I wanted to, part of the reason was to break these tall tales we tell ourselves about our own traditions and really get to the heart of, you can put all that away and you'll still have something beautiful and amazing and complex, because I love the complex. I love the muck because that's what our lives are. It's mucky. It's sticky. It's and we don't have easy solutions, and we shouldn't expect easy solutions. But I think the tradition itself is saying even this process of pulling yourself out of the muck is not easy. It's a difficult one. You're going to fail, but we'll have opportunities, and you'll keep doing better and better and better as long as you put that effort. And that's what I love about the larger Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, the Dharmic traditions. It's there is the aspect of God's grace, but it's also the aspect of there's something deeply pure about us that we have to get back to. And I don't know, that's just
eventually the lotus emerges from out of that muck.
Yeah. So any last thoughts before we let you go, and then we can have another session maybe in a couple weeks?
Well, I'm just grateful to be here. I've learned from both of you, and I've enjoyed it. And I'd look forward to joining again. And I hope anyone listening, that they found it an enriching experience.
So, where can people reach you if they want to email you, or how do you want to be best reached?
So the easiest way to reach me is probably my email at Elizabethtown College. It's longjd@etown.edu. Sometimes that email address doesn't always work. Our server sometimes is kind of overzealous about filtering things. I have a Yahoo address too that people can. It's kind of a funny handle, but I was able to grab it. dharmaprof108@yahoo.com. So,
but you still kept a Yahoo address. That's that's old school.
I've still got it. Yeah, I've got my well, and when I write to people, when I respond to people from that, they get the email, and it doesn't always happen for some reason with the college one. So maybe they should try the Yahoo. Yeah, dharmaprof108@yahoo.com.
And I'll put your books access to the show notes and any other lectures that you've given, so people can go out and see your work.
Well, thank you very much. I think I have a new book coming in February, Discovering Indian Philosophy.
Oh, that'd be interesting. That'd be nice. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Long.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Namaskar.
पावन मुनि जन यमुना तीरे पावन मुनि जन यमुना तीरे गायती वनमाली गायती वनमाली मधुरम गायती वनमाली